Okay, well, then I'll just start from over here.
Okay.
So we are joined by Adam Honig from Acquia,
Hey,
and Adam is one of the maintainers of Lightning distribution curated by Acquia. And I get this right, you've been working on Drupal since 2007, is that right?
Drupal 5, man.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The olden days.
That's amazing. And so Lightning is, you're currently the senior software engineer at Acquia's Drupal acceleration team.
One of them, yeah.
Maintainers of Lightning, and you've been working on that since 2015?
I have. Yep.
And then you're also co-maintaining the migration system in core and helping run the media initiative. Does that cover it?
That is those are my credentials.
All right. So we're here to hear from Adam, to hear him talk about what Lightning is, what its purpose is, maybe how it kind of got to where it's at, where it's going. And I think, Adam, you probably have seen some of the conversation that we had in the Drupal group. I don't know how much of that you want to try to talk to. And of course, if there are questions from the group, it'd be great to hear from you as well. So if you don't mind starting kind of telling us a little bit about Lightning and kind of its purpose and how it got to be what it is today.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So I can't see anybody but you in the room. So how many people do we have in there?
We have 6 people right now.
Okay, so how many of you 6 have used Lightning before? Show of hands. And then tell us how many. About half of you? Okay, cool. Well, thank you, and sorry, both. And so the story with Lightning is it's a Drupal 8 distribution, created and maintained by Acquia. It's an open source distribution, and it's also been, due to some unique engineering features, it's also been used as a base for other distributions. I think OpenEDU is one of them. But Lightning's goal, first and foremost, is to improve the content authoring experience that you get with Drupal out of the box. Core does a lot of stuff right. It also is missing a lot of things. And so Lightning's purpose was really to kind of jump ahead and give people the features that we thought they really needed for much easier authoring and what I think people wanted to do as content authors. And by I mean, me, Adam Balsam, who's the other co-maintainer, and also the tech lead of Lightning, and also John Kennedy, who's no longer with Acquia, but he originated this idea of Lightning as the distribution for content authoring. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And the way I got involved with it was that the Lightning used to be a Drupal 7 distribution, actually, that was a completely different kind of thing. And it was developed and maintained by the demo team at Acquia, and they build kind of like really cool demo sites for potential customers and stuff like that. And they had this distribution called Lightning, and I saw it a few years ago at Badcamp, and I was pretty blown away because it did all these things that I had long, as a site builder for 6 or 7 years, I'd long wished Drupal could do, without having to set up 10,000 modules and have a PhD in setting up all of those modules. So I was like, man, this is amazing. I want to work on that. And when Acquia decided to go ahead and build Lightning as kind of as an open source product for content authors, I jumped at that, and that's how I got where I came to be today.
So is Lightning? So it started at 7. Do you feel like there are other distributions that are that informed what Lightning is today, or that are, and then conversely, other distributions that are sort of trying to do what Lightning is doing in maybe a different way?
I can say that Lightning has generally been pretty much we've kind of always done what we wanted to do because we have our scope is very broad compared to some other distributions where OpenEDU, which I think is based on Lightning, is specifically for educational institutions. So it's going to be loaded with a lot of features and configuration and stuff and modules that are useful for that use case. And they know that use case better than we do, frankly. Thunder's another example. It's not based on Lightning, but it's also a distribution where the intention there, as it was explained to me by Berta, who maintain it, was to create a distribution for like publishers. And so it has a lot of features and additional, stuff that's really heavily geared towards that audience. And Lightning was always meant to be more general, where the way I was looking at it was really like, this is stuff that I very strongly feel should be in Drupal core. And that I think almost everybody could benefit from. So we haven't really been informed by other distributions in terms of how Lightning has developed, and that's mostly just because we're trying to appeal to almost everybody, much like Drupal itself is in a lot of ways. And other distributions tend to be more focused on like, oh, this niche, these kinds of use cases. So that right there is like the strength of those distributions in comparison to Lightning. And yeah, my ultimate goal, honestly, I say this a lot, is that I think Lightning should ultimately not exist, because a lot of everything it does should be, I think, part of core. Or at least to a great extent part of core. So the ultimate asymptotic goal, which, we'll probably never reach or I'm out of a job, is for Lightning to kind of just be what we get by default.
So the work on Lightning then, do you see Lightning as a well, I was going to ask, some people just came back from bad camp, and there was, I think, I got the sense, a lot of decoupled talk, a lot of, headless Drupal or decoupled Drupal talk. And I wonder how well or how much does Lightning fit in that kind of, in the world with like a decoupled Drupal?
Well, honestly, it sort of does. And so the thing about like Lightning and decoupled stuff is there was, a couple of years ago, we came up with this thing called headless Lightning, which is a sub-profile of Lightning. It's a variant of Lightning. And its purpose is, to sort of be a profile that has Lightning plus, the JSON API module and I think a couple of others, and makes a few like changes to the administrative UI that would be, the idea being to like sort of streamline it for people who are building the backend for a decoupled application. And that was inspired by work. Have you heard of Reservoir? So that was a distro that
said yes.
Somebody said yes.
Dave Reed, yes.
Dave said yeah. I'm not surprised. But Reservoir. So yeah, Reservoir was a thing that Acquia created. I had nothing to do with it. But it was another distribution that they built with the idea of actually, let's make a decoupled backend, and then sort of somehow, and this, I have no idea how this even happened, but like somehow the impetus came through that it's like, okay, now Lightning has to do that too. And it probably had more to do with the fact that Reservoir was very experimental. And I don't know, I'm not really sure how stable it was. It had a lot more hype than Lightning did, but Lightning was kind of more of an established product at that point. So it's like, well, we should add that to Lightning as well. So what we ended up doing was kind of doing a very light version of that because, decoupled is a space that I don't, I'm not as up to speed on it as I should be. I was actually just struggling with Gatsby.js before I joined the Zoom. I'm like, GraphQL, this makes no sense. So, that should give you a sense of where I'm at with this stuff. So kind of where we're at is like we did sort of a light version of that, where we created this component called Lightning API, which is essentially a glue module, bringing together, I think, OAuth, OpenAPI, Redoc, and JSON API, which like turned out to be pretty lucky because JSON API is a thing that they're working on to try to get into core as kind of the decoupled, sort of as the decoupled backend. I think that they want to land in Drupal core, probably before Drupal 9. Then that's part of the API first initiative and everything. So that's kind of that's about as far as we've gone with it, honestly, where, our main focus is still kind of improving the back-end authoring experience with Drupal out of the box, and giving you like the basic tools you would need for decoupled stuff, but we haven't like gone very heavily into that space.
How do you think Drupal 8 is doing in terms of its adoption and in terms of its kind of feature completeness. The reason I ask this is that someone not here, he couldn't make it today, but we were having a meeting with him yesterday, and he just came back from bad camp and was having conversations with people and said he felt like there was this sense that Drupal 8 is still not quite ready for prime time, maybe. Mm-hmm. And that there might be some, getting a phone call, sorry.
No, it's okay.
That there's still a lot of people not only using 7, but even saying they don't ever particularly want to leave 7. Is that, are you hearing something like that, or do you feel like Drupal 8 is that much undeveloped for the purposes of like most people's use cases?
Oh man, it's a loaded question. But
I mean, just it doesn't. I'm just wondering, like, what you have. What do you feel like is that the sentiment, but also like, what is the maybe perspective that you would bring to it?
I mean, I personally don't feel that Drupal 8 is undeveloped. I think it's very, very different from Drupal 7 in many, many, many ways. I mean, I know that's the case. Everybody knows that. And that, the thing is, like, Drupal 7 had a really developed ecosystem, and a lot of the processes were different, and like the whole structure of modules was different, in many ways. And so Drupal 8, I think, if, as a developer, like if I was writing contrib modules, or I was maintaining a very popular contrib module, or I was very, very comfortable with procedural Drupal, I would feel, I can see how I would feel kind of intimidated and, getting that feeling like Drupal 8 was undeveloped, and that its ecosystem, its module ecosystem especially, was undeveloped compared to Drupal 7. So I think I can see where people are coming from with that. I don't personally agree, and honestly, that's probably because, like, when you join Acquia Drupal engineering, like, you stop building sites pretty much, and so I haven't built a site in years, which is, that's a known issue. That we're thinking, it came up the other day actually in a meeting where it's like, what if we hardcore Drupal engineers went and actually like built sites for a month, so we know the pain points. So, and I mean, so I guess, like, I personally don't agree with it, but I can see where people are coming from. And I think a lot of the, I think, yeah, it's a tough question, honestly. And like, people who don't want to leave 7, I mean, eventually they're going to have to, for security reasons. I mean, Drupal 7 will be end of lifed. But if it's like this, if it's the thing that's working for them and they don't want to, like, sort of disrupt everything with Drupal 8, which, admittedly is an inside out rewrite of Drupal core, it makes sense to stay on that for now. I can totally sympathize with that, even if I don't agree with it personally. But I mean, I don't honestly feel like it's undeveloped or not ready for prime time. That may be true of some parts of the contrib ecosystem, but core itself, I think, is pretty much, can do whatever you need it to do, and it can do, I think, everything it did in Drupal 7. Just differently. That's my feelings on it, honestly. But that's, caveat being that, like, that's coming from a guy who doesn't build sites day to day anymore.
Sure. Dave?
I would say it's gotten better in the last year, like from where we were. I would definitely agree, like, that people on Drupal 7 is perfectly fine for them to stay on Drupal 7. Like, that's okay. Like, that's an okay decision for them to make. They can start doing things to help plan a migration to Drupal 8 that would apply very much towards Drupal 9 as well. Like, making choices, kind of preparing the site now. But yeah, it's fine. People will stay on 7 too. But if they're building a new site, I'd say it's totally fine to start on 8.
Yeah.
Why are people so worried about the security of Drupal 8? Like, I interviewed with another company that was on Drupal 7, and they were going to continue for the rest of the product. Why were they so concerned with security?
The question was, why is there such a security concern around Drupal 8?
So I actually had this explained to me yesterday. So good timing on that. So here's the thing about that is Drupal 8 is built on top of Symfony and other upstream dependencies. And, it sort of stands to reason that, just as time goes on, you can't maintain the ancientest versions of everything forever. And, eventually you have to kind of just cut it off and just be like, I mean, PHP itself, PHP 5.6, I think is less than a month away from being just end of life. So in Drupal's case, it's because Symfony 3, which I think Drupal 8 is currently depending on, is going to reach its end of life, I think at the end of 2021. And so, we can't just switch to Symfony 4 because that would break backwards compatibility and like break everything for everybody. So I think the easiest thing to do there is, because like let's say once Symfony 3 has reached end of life, if there are security bugs in it, they're not going to get fixed. And then, hello, anything you have that's using Symfony 3 could get hacked, that's served on the, on the internet. And so I think it's a question of just being able to keep up with the upstream dependencies there, and to be able to use versions that are at least maintained for security, because nothing's worse than getting hacked at the end of the day. So that's the concern there, because Drupal, like everything in Drupal is written with like, it's actually kind of annoying to me personally, but like everything in Drupal is written with security in mind first and foremost. And like, I appreciate what the security team does. Even though it's like a pain in the butt sometimes, where it's like, man, security, you're really going to do it that way? And like security is always first, which I can understand. And so that's the concern there. It's just about, it's about just staying on secure, maintained versions of upstream dependencies.
Yeah, there's a lot more moving parts involved with Drupal 8. Like, we're reliant on a lot more code now. Like, yeah. And the fact that their development cycles, like you explained, like we're starting to use old code already by the time that we release, like that we're starting with. And I think it's also a matter of issue, like Drupal 7's been out for so long that we've had a chance to kind of see what all the exploits that possibly could happen are. And it's only the really, really, really hard to find stuff that gets left. Whereas if we've introduced new code, new patterns in Drupal 8 that may not have had that coverage within our community as much. It may be more well covered, like from a Symfony perspective, that they've been, covered that more. I don't know. It's like it's new things with more moving parts. It happens when that happens, and it'll settle.
It kind of sounds like the newness itself is part of the concern. The fact that it's unfamiliar, that Symfony to a Drupal 7 or prior developer, these upstream dependencies are themselves new enough to be intimidating, such that they may defer from porting a module sooner than they would otherwise if it was kind of the same underlying code base for Drupal core from a 7 to 8.
Yeah.
I will say though, from at least like from a module writing and site building perspective, it's a lot harder to write, like to make mistakes and make basic like XSS attacks on your site, because with the Twig auto escaping, it helps cover quite a lot more cases that you wouldn't have thought you needed to cover. We're like, oh yeah, I need to add a checkpoint here. Like it just does it for you.
Because you're not using the PHP templating system that was in 7, or because
just with everything in Drupal 7, like whether it was PHP template or you're outputting HTML yourself, you had to escape it manually yourself.
Okay.
But now if you route everything through Twig or the render system, it gets, for the most part, everything gets auto escaped for you. Nice.
If that was Dave, then yeah, what Dave said.
That was Dave. So if you imagine you're a Drupal 7 person, you're interested in starting to either develop modules or maybe even like help work on modules that need to be ported over to 8 to help build up that ecosystem till it gets, kind of feature parity with 7's contributed space. Where does a developer start? What do they need to know fundamentally or foundationally before they kind of feel like they can be contributors or feel like they're comfortable contributing?
Well, I mean, object-oriented programming is probably at the top of that list. We saw a little of that in Drupal 7, but not a lot. And Drupal 8 really fully embraces it on every level. And then there's a few additional concepts that I think go along with that, like one of them being dependency injection, which is quite foundational to how Drupal 8 code is architected. And that's a really scary sounding word. It's not actually scary in practice, but it sounds scarier than it is. And that's one of those things where it's like, it's easier to just kind of do it because people say, do this, it's the right way. And then like, just kind of take people's word for it, honestly. Because like the benefit of that pattern and of that approach, it can be sort of more theoretical, but it can have concrete benefits with very complicated code, like Drupal core itself. Another thing I think is important in Drupal 8 very much so is actually plugins. So I don't know if anybody in the room has dealt with the CTools plugin system or authored plugins for the CTools plugin system, but that entire concept of, okay, so I guess at least one person.
It was Dave.
It was okay. Well, you know what? I'm just going to start doing all the things. Again, that whole concept of like just creating code that is discoverable and many different implementations of a certain task is very, very foundational to Drupal 8. It's plugins all the way down. And that's another thing where the documentation for that is actually very good, which is surprising for Drupal, but there you go. And so there's very good documentation explaining how to do that if you have a reasonably solid grasp of like object-oriented coding. And I think those two things, honestly, are two of the most critical. If you're a Drupal 7 developer trying to understand how Drupal 8 code fits together. The entity system is also, like, getting into slightly more obscure stuff. The entity system is quite a bit different now. There's this whole idea of, everything is made of fields. I mean, everything was already made of fields in Drupal 7, but everything, like the NID, the UID on a node, for example, that's all just made of fields. So that's sort of that's a little bit different. And the good news there is there's so many, reference implementations you can use in core and in contrib. And that's only, for people who are implementing their own entity types. Forms are, different cosmetically, but kind of the way they work is very similar. We still have hook form alter and all that sort of good stuff. And I mean, there are definitely a lot of, I like to say to like people who don't know the Drupal 8 APIs like super well, it's just like, if something seems crazy, it's probably actually crazy and it's not you. Because there's a lot of things in Drupal core still that are just like weird, where some things, sometimes modules will react to things using hooks and sometimes you use event subscribers, and like there's no real rhyme or reason as to when one is used over the other. And that can make things, super confusing, because I can totally see that like in D7 it was all hooks, so at least it was all consistent. And in Drupal 8 it's like, is it an event subscriber or is it a hook? And those are completely different things, and they're written totally differently. And that's an example of a thing where I would just be like, in that case, if it's confusing, like go on Slack, ask for help. Nobody with, Drupal 8 experience is going to laugh at you, because that stuff's just all nuts. And that's, I think that's also changing over time. It's just that making those kinds of changes in core, and then, by extension in contrib, they just take a long time, because there's all kinds of agreements have to be made and backwards compatibility has to be considered. And it's just a very, very, very slow process. Documentation helps, but our documentation is notoriously weak. That's true of Lightning as well. So, yeah.
Put that up during, I think it was on Talking Drupal. I remember you mentioned that in particular. I wanted to ask about that. Is the documentation of Lightning, and then by extension, contribution to Lightning, how much is that something that other developers outside of Acquia can or do contribute to?
People Oh, that's the thing about, so let me back up and say that my exact words on the podcast, for those who didn't hear it, is our documentation sucks. That's exactly what I said, and I meant it, because and I honestly think it's kind of a resourcing problem. Like, I can write documentation if I have the time, but I never have the time. There's always tests that have to, there's this feature that has to happen and this patch that needs to be re-rolled and stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and blame it on not enough resources, even though the documentation team has been offered to us. We just never get a chance to like sit down with them and be like, okay, I need you to explain this and this and this and this to people in plain English. And even if we did, I would like to think that Acquia would let us release that documentation for free instead of like putting it on Acquia's website somewhere, possibly behind a paywall, which I really hope they wouldn't do. But like, yeah, there's we just don't get the time to write documentation, to write good documentation. And contributor documentation, I am amazed by some of the brave souls who submit patches to Lightning, because it's very, very idiosyncratic, and we don't have solid contributor guidelines. We're kind of just like, git clone it and install Drupal, yay, but that's, Lightning is built with Composer. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I think we were joined by someone else.
We definitely were. I just didn't catch the, if that was a question, I didn't catch it. But
did you have a question? I wonder. I'm not sure. Okay.
Sorry, what was that?
If you whoever has joined us, they dropped off. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, TLDR. I don't have time to write good documentation, and I wish I did. And I especially wish I had time to write better contributor documentation, because, there's bugs in Lightning and fixing them would help. And even for people who, are equipped to contribute to Lightning, one of the things that I really don't like, and this, I still don't like know a way to improve this really, is like our testing is very aggressive. And it's also very like, hey, we're going to kind of do our own thing over here, whatever it takes to test it. So there's not really documentation on how to write tests. And that's a gate for us. Like, we need tests for just about everything, which is how we stay stable. And yeah, so like, that's kind of a sad maker,
Yeah.
And it kind of and it's sort of a problem of my own making too. 'Cause it's like, if I don't write documentation, like, I'm going to be the only person who can maintain this, me and anybody Acquia like hires or contracts with to work on Lightning, because then I can teach them about it. So, yeah, I don't have a good answer on that one, honestly.
So that's one of the things I wanted to make sure that I understood, was just how much Lightning is a part of Acquia than it is maybe a project that is maintained by Acquia but has broader contributions from the larger community to it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's mostly maintained by Acquia. I feel like it's getting community involvement in it is a thing we could take advantage of, if the resources were there to do it. Because, like, when you invite a lot of contribution, I mean, that's a beautiful thing. But you obviously also get a lot of management that has to come along with that, and sort of time to be looking through people's patches and requests and, oh, should we add this to Lightning? Should we not add this to Lightning? Let's bike shed this. Let's yak shave that. And yeah, it's just, we're effectively a 2-person team right now. I think we have a contractor on at the moment, helping us with some backlog stuff. So, 3-person team. And so it's just very, there's trade-offs to it. Like, it's, on the one hand, we can move really, really fast and be super agile, because it's just like, oh, hey, I think that's a good idea. Oh, I agree. Adam Balsam agrees. Let's merge it. If we had a much bigger contributor ecosystem, it would probably slow things down a little bit to a degree. So yeah, benefits and trade-off. There's good things and bad things about it. But, the documentation could definitely be better. No question in my mind about that.
I was on the Slack channel the other day, the Lightning Slack channel, and I think I may have mentioned this because I actually have a call. We have an Acquia contract, so I was talking to our account rep, and I said, the Lightning channel is this incredible resource, and I don't know how long it's been growing, but we are really using it more. And even if we're not asking questions, I feel like I'm learning so much more because of the involvement of you and Adam Balsam in it. And I was kind of wondering, like, how do you have time? I'm assuming that there's also, you know, the Acquia Slack that, because like we have here, you know, like the Creighton Slack group where you're kind of talking about things you're working on any given day at any time, and then you're sort of talking to the larger community who are interested in or using Lightning. How do you balance that and get anything done?
Well, I don't I don't like spend time monitoring the channel or anything. I'll kind of occasionally glance in there, or the quickest way, okay, I'm about to shoot myself in the foot here, but the quickest way to get my attention in there is to @ me in that Slack channel. And I will definitely, you know, if I'm not asleep, I will definitely be there and try to help you. Because it's just the right thing to do, you know, it's what I would want people to do if I was if I was a user of Lightning and not the maintainer. So yeah, if you have questions, sending me an @ or a direct message is really the easiest and best way to get questions answered and stuff. And other times, like I'll like end up in there by accident, and I'll like look at the latest question. It's like, oh, I know what's going on there, and then it's like, okay, yeah, let me just type a reply because I'm here anyway. But yeah, like as far as having the time, I like don't. Happens.
Okay, so I have other questions, but I want to open it up to the group. If you have questions that maybe you've been thinking but haven't had a chance to ask, are there any things that people would want to know?
Well, if not, that's cool.
Answer every question.
I was actually pretty scared of there was so in the Drupal, the groups.drupal.org thing about this event, there was a talk about the sub-profile patch. I was afraid that was going to come up. So, but I'm ready for you if anybody's thinking about that. And, you know, we can commiserate about its status in terms of getting into core.
With that? Yeah, why don't, if you don't mind, I think that is an issue in that, if I'm not mistaken, Nick and I worked together here at Creighton. I think that when we first were looking at our current Drupal 8 project, we tried to sub-profile, and we were having some issues around that, weren't we?
Well, we're having issues in general, so that got removed at some point.
But do you remember when we had the quick start and David Playtech originally said, let's sub-profile this other thing? It was like OpenEDU. We were going to build Creighton off OpenEDU. And we were like, okay, this doesn't work. This just kind of like exploded in this weird way. He's like, all right, let's just do it off Lightning rather than OpenEDU. And then so we kind of pulled it back one level. And then yes, at some point, I think when we were working with Travis, we kind of moved it from sub-profile, explicitly sub-profile, to much less. If you look at our actual creating the custom profile, there's very little going on in that file, if I'm not mistaken.
I mean, I put our base profile in there from our old repo. It's like
So, Adam, could you just, for the group who probably weren't following, what is the issue that is what is that issue around sub-profiling?
So the idea of sub-profiling, this is a core issue that has been open for like longer than I've been in Drupal. It's been open for a really, really long time. And the ask that it's a feature request, and the ask there is so you have install profiles, right? And an install profile is essentially two things. It's a list of modules and themes that you want to have turned on at install time when you install a new Drupal site. And it's a set of configuration that you want to have automatically imported, some of which can override configuration that is coming from the modules you're installing. And that's really what it is. So the idea behind subprofiling is that people want to be able to say, it's just like object-oriented programming where you extend a class. They want to say, I want to take Lightning and install everything it's got except for a couple of those things, and I also want to change a little bit of its configuration and override it, all done at install time. And that's the feature that people are asking for. And it has devolved into an issue that is, I think, pushing 500 comments. And there are children who have been alive for less time than this issue has been a thing. And it's like, I think it's at RTBC now, and I have given up hope of ever seeing it land in core in its current form for a whole bunch of reasons, which I can describe if you want me to. But it's also a thing that the interesting thing is, like, this is an issue that so many people very clearly want, particularly people who work like in educational organizations, because this is like, that use case is a very, very common use case. Lightning was a little bit ahead of that feature, like in ancient history, like years ago, we had a thing called the Lightning Extender, which was kind of like that, but completely custom. It wasn't using the install profile system at all. And when we finally got this patch to shipshape, we just pulled it into Lightning and patched core, and got rid of the Lightning Extender. So, and it was instantly very, very popular and everybody loved it. So we're not going to remove that functionality from Lightning anytime soon. But we kind of have that the core patch is kind of just on life support right now, where it's like, okay, if it doesn't apply, I'll re-roll it. If we have to write a test, we will, and we are testing it also as part of Lightning's normal testing routine, but we're not adding anything to it. We're not really doing much we're not really advocating for it anymore. There's just too many, there's just too many like problems with trying to get it into core, and it's sort of, the interesting thing about it is it also sort of conflicts with design decisions that are being made elsewhere, and kind of where core wants to go in the future, specifically with regard to like how, what profiles are even for, and how config works, and whether, and the whole idea of, what a subprofile is really about is kind of compositing your profile together. It's like, I want everything except these things, and it's really about kind of composition, and profiles are just, honestly, like from a core development perspective, they're just too weird. Like, profiles are so strange, and they've been conflated with distributions on Drupal.org. And like, they can have modules, and then if they have modules, all other modules are invisible if they come in other profiles, and like, who owns the config when you have subprofiles? And it's so weird. And it's cool that we've gotten it to work in a patch, but it's too weird for the core maintainers, and for the committers, because it would introduce technical debt, it would introduce questions, and like, once a thing is merged into core, it's now core's responsibility. And I think that there's a lot of hesitation to embrace that, particularly when there are so many other questions about like how a Drupal site is composited together and how config is kind of condensed together at install time and in the course of a site's lifetime. And that's kind of why I'm like, that's where I'm at the point where, like, when I see a new comment on the subprofile patch, I'm just like, I'm so sorry. Like, I read the comment and I'm just like, let me take a drink for this patch. But that being said, like, the functionality that's being asked for is not crazy at all. Like that request of like, I want to be able to take this thing and customize it further. That's not crazy. That's the Drupal way. So the issue, I think, is not so much what is being asked for from the subprofile patch, so much as how it's implemented. And the fact that it touches the installer significantly is dangerous, to say the least, because the installer is just nightmare code. And nobody really understands it except like two people. And they have other things to do.
Let me ask you, okay, I don't know if you've thought of any questions, but if you were to install Drupal today, would you tell someone to install most likely install from a distribution like Lightning as opposed to straight up core, or is it all dependent?
I think it would be dependent. So one of the things Lightning went and did is so all of our functionality is split into component modules, and we, probably close to a year ago at this point, we just split them apart into their own composer packages. So what it's now possible to do is, with some caveats, you can install Lightning stuff on top of vanilla Drupal, so you don't actually even need the profile, you don't even need the distribution to have those features. So my feeling is that it kind of depends on your needs. Like if you feel very comfortable, like, getting you a Drupal and downloading all the modules and configuring it so it's just so, then vanilla Drupal is fine for you, because you're that kind of person. And if what you want is something that's just kind of just going to have a lot of opinions and just kind of work when you install it, it's like, I want exactly that thing. I want the thing I see on the label. Then you might be better off with a distribution, because that's really what they're for. They're like they're a pre-made solution, for lack of a better word. Where it's just like, here, you install it and it does the thing that you want. So I think it really depends on like whether you're on how developer-y you are, I suppose, and how comfortable you are with hacking around in Drupal, because it's Drupal. It's hard to use and it's complex to configure. And if you just want to use it and have it work, then probably a distribution is right. Especially coming back to what we talked about before, if you have a very specific use case and you're in a very specific industry where it's like, I'm a publisher, I'm an educational organization. You want a lot of, there may be just a lot of stuff that you want built for you. And the distro makes sense there. I think Dries agreed. He had a while ago, he had a blog post about how distributions are the future of Drupal. And I think we're sort of slowly marching towards that, where it's like we can actually make distributions easier to work with, because right now they can be pretty tricky, and updating them is a completely unsolved problem. Lightning does it one way, Thunder does it a completely different way, to my knowledge, and however OpenEDU does it, I have just no idea, or if they do it. So that's all just unsolved stuff that would be really nice to have, and I think it's going to be necessary to solve all these problems before distributions can really be first-class citizens.
I actually got an email from one of the developers at ImageX around this, because he had read some of the conversation that was being had about upgrading, and they specifically, the conversation was around subprofiles, but even just upgrading when you're basing it on another distribution. And that came up. He emailed me directly, and I said, well, we're having this conversation here, maybe just join it, so that they can sort of be in the open and have it. And then I invited him to this to see if he wanted to participate. I feel like that is an issue that people are concerned about, how to update. I mean, we just kind of updated a lot of our modules from Lightning. We use Lightning to do it. So in a way, it was a lot easier, I'd say. I mean, Nick did most of the work, but I mean, this was kind of the first time we did a major upgrade of 8. And we did it from Lightning. So I feel like, what do you think, Nick? Didn't it seem like a lot of the work was done for us?
Yeah, it felt a lot easier.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I was going to say, if it was really painful, I am so sorry to hear that.
I followed the Lightning procedures on them.
All right.
Actually, the hardest thing was getting Acquia to do some update DB stuff. The visual running to the site factory.
Yeah.
It was somewhat painful seeing all the sites fail, and then telling it to do it again and try and update. Once you get that, you can figure it work.
Mm-hmm.
We were a few versions.
Okay, well, that's.
Well,
I'm sorry, Site Factory blew up.
Yeah, it didn't blow up all the way. No, it worked out really well.
It only sort of exploded. Okay.
Yeah. Locally, I was like, what was happening? And I had to figure out that there's like 45 databases. Okay. And that changed all the config. Okay, let me export the config.
Yeah.
I got the dev server away. I ran into the same issue, but then I imported the config. I had already exported it. It worked out great.
Okay. Well, at least it worked.
That's the only problem that I'm having, is getting that one module from alpha to input. But it was
was a problem updating Entity Browser?
Yeah, my local, let me see. I put in the update and for some reason, it just seems to want to be stuck at altitude. No matter what I can do. I mean, I'll start it back up right now. If it just needs to. I'm talking on my local machine, so.
Good luck.
I used Composer to upgrade it, and I checked to make sure the module is upgraded.
Mm-hmm. I think, I mean, yeah, updating is already so hard, even if you're not using a distribution, and a distribution just exacerbates the problem right now, because, you know, what I found is, like, if you want to bring your Lightning-based site in line with upstream changes in Lightning, but the site owns the config, now we cannot, like, we in Lightning cannot make any assumptions as to how your config is set up. Because the last thing we want to do is change something without telling you, and thus potentially break your site for all we know. And that like right there is the problem. It's like the solution we have is just like we ask. We have like a command line utility that does it, but that's not really, still kind of sucks, honestly. You know, the other way, of course, is we have instructions, I think that you saw, explaining how to go and do the update, like in the UI and with Drush. And that also sucks. But it's just one of those things where it's a completely unsolved problem with config, and it's just not because, like, I think that the whole idea of adopting distributions came out after Drupal 8, and so, like, while it was being developed with CMI and everything, and the way they thought of it, I just don't think they conceived of that as a thing that as a direction we would be going, and so, like, we all have to go rogue with this stuff, and, you know. And it can get really, really squirrely. Like, if you have to migrate any kind of, make any kind of migration-y type changes in, like, data models, and I'm specifically thinking of changing workbench moderation to content moderation here, because that was like the worst month ever. It's like, that gets super, super dicey, and it makes the update path really, really complex. And it's, yeah, like, there's just no, I think there's just a lot of different, it's kind of a Wild West right now in that regard, honestly. And I think until that's a solved problem, that's another thing that kind of blocks distributions. But I will say this, I think Composer, although it's hard as hell to use, I think it actually solves also a lot of problems in the update space. Because, like, when you use Composer, it's like you're pretty much guaranteed to always be getting stuff that's going to work together. And that's its whole point. That's the entire reason we even use Composer. So that takes a lot of, problems out potentially. But the upshot of that is it's a completely different workflow from anything we as Drupalists are used to, where, we're supposed to go to D.O and download a tarball, and extract it over the old code base and then commit the result to Git, and Composer just don't work that way. And because of that, like, we have this 90-degree learning curve that we have to deal with. And so it's that on top of the fact that config updates are painful. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with, like, internal Acquia users of Lightning who, they come into the internal Lightning channel and are like, hey, my update broke. I was trying to update from, some ancient history version to the current, jumping over like a couple of major versions, and it broke. And I'm like, I'm part, like, sympathetic, and I'm part, like, why did you do that? Like, keep up to date, man. Because, I mean, Lightning is kind of written in a way and tested in a way where if you, like, the smaller the update path you're trying to do, the more likely it is to go smoothly. If you're trying to do a huge jump, you're almost certainly going to run into problems. And yeah, that is one of the hardest problems that we're still facing,
So I sort of said, Adam, if you could give us an hour, and we're coming close to that. So before we let you go, I wanted to reach out to the group again to see if there are any things that you are curious about, or things that you wanted to sort of make sure to bring up before we let out go.
Yeah. What do you use to write tabs? Like Jazzman, or what do you do?
So the question, if I heard it correctly, was what do we use to test?
Yeah.
So we test primarily, we were for a long time testing primarily with BHAT. All of our tests were BHAT tests. Some were just, and all BHAT tests are functional tests, which means they run against a browser and sort of interact with the site as a user would. And some of them were JavaScript tests where, we would actually run it against, I think, Chrome using Selenium. And we've recently also adopted PHP Unit for that because there's just many cases in which BHAT frankly sucks and is hard to use. So we've taken we've taken multiple approaches, but it's primarily BHAT and PHP Unit, mostly using Core's. Like when it comes to PHP Unit, we use Core's existing test infrastructure and try to test our features in an isolated way. But yeah, BHAT and PHP Unit are our testing tools.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions from anyone?
So the best way, if we didn't have questions, like,
Sorry, what was that?
The best way to talk with you is the Lightning channel.
Oh yeah.
Without tagging you, unless you'll respond.
At tag me in Slack, and I will probably come running.
Okay. That's fine.
It's drupal.slack.com.
Yeah.
And honestly, I joined it maybe 2-3 months ago, and it's awesome. I mean, just the amount of people on it, and the support channel is insane. I mean, the support channel, and there's a Lightning channel, there's an Acquia support channel, there's a BLT channel. I mean, it's pretty much anything you could think is an issue or is used. I think I was looking at something, there was a channel on that, and what's it? Gatsby? Maybe there was a channel for Gatsby or something.
I'm sure there is.
Because I was looking at that Badcamp one about Gatsby, and I think the presenter was talking about that. Yeah, and so I mean, almost anything you're trying to do, there's a channel.
What was the other method that they were using? I had a hard time getting on that.
IRC?
IRC, I was using IRC for a while now. Is this the main method, or is this?
Does anyone use IRC anymore? I mean, at Acquia.
I'm the exception, though. I mean, most of the community members have switched to using Slack, and it's usually the best way to contact like people that are maintaining stuff, or if you want to have people that are knowledgeable in questions and are available to answer, and they are using it during their workday, like they're probably using Slack.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely switched to Slack, and that's where I find everybody. Whatever that's worth. So yeah.
Yeah, we kind of use that pretty much only here. Although my boss uses my boss uses Skype for Business. But, yeah.
Well, not going to work for the community, I'm afraid. Well, maybe it will. Who knows? I guess at least there's one guy.
Right. So is that it? Are we? Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we may be talking again over Slack. So and I assume, do you go to any of the camps or cons?
Yeah, I definitely do. Whenever I can con Acquia into sending me. Con meaning convince, of course. And I'm usually at DrupalCon, although they usually send people who have sessions, and I don't have a session for Seattle, so who knows? Probably. And yeah, I try to go to the camps when I can. I'm going to a NED camp actually, which is going to be in Providence, Rhode Island, this weekend, I think on Saturday. And I go to some local camps as well, and I've never actually been to Mid Camp, but I'd really like to go because apparently that's a mini DrupalCon. I've been to Bad Camp a couple of times, and I didn't make it this year, unfortunately, but I'd like to go again. So yeah, I'm occasionally around.
Okay. Well, then we may run into you in person as well.
Absolutely. You beat me with a bag of potatoes for Lightning, and next time your upgrade fails, which hopefully it doesn't.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a great night. I appreciate your time.
All right. You too, folks.
Bye now.
Cheers.